Miigwech, Kwekakina, Nindawe Maganiduk, Misquades, Indigenacas, Pimizid, Dodam, Omami Anishnabe Koyandao, Kitiganzibi, and Dojava. And I really see this as an interaction with my own understanding of the dynamic nature of ancestry and my ancestors, and my perception of time, and how our presence on this earth as Anishinaabe people is very much facilitated by our ancestors. And so there is always work to do, and there's always a place for us, no matter what the condition of the external circumstances that befall our lands. There's always somewhere for us to be. There's always work for us to do. There's always ways for us to find joy and meaning and connection, even with those who are radically different than us. And we will always have our ways about us to exist in that space and to carry each other forward. And those who are part of our lineage and heritage also have very inclusive systems that bring others in. And so that's historically been abused in a lot of ways. But for me, when I follow the trail of my teachings and my elders and my teachers and the things, my dreams and other teaching methodologies, that's what we would call them here, right? But it's our knowing, it's our very ontology as Anishinaabe people. And me being involved with the water in a way that I don't even fully understand in English or in any other way. It's like, I think I'm going to do this thing that is going to help me understand the water, but it leads me in a way that teaches me that in order to understand how to care for the water, we have to open our hearts in this whole other way that involves educational systems and involves reaching others in ways that you don't expect. Because how can I go to a policymaker and say, water is our relative and we must stop abusing water, without knowing the language of the system that allows water to be a commodified product, right? I went through a lot of trials and tribulations. I didn't always do well in school. I had a lot of educational trauma, as many people do, around conforming to the expectations of white professors and educators who had an idea about how education works. For example, I remember I took a British literature course once and I had perfect attendance. I did so well, and I was sat in the front and I always raised my hand and I had so much to say, and I did a really good job on the paper too and all the assignments, and I should have had an A. And at the end, the professor gave me a C. And I felt really, I was like, that has to be a mistake. So, and he was never unkind to me. He was an older gentleman, a scholar of British literature, very proud of his cabin and his cottage and his land and all these other things, right? I remember looking at that C and thinking that has to be a mistake. So I approached him and he was very hostile. And he said, you didn't do a good enough job with Keats. I don't think you understand Keats. And I'm like, I don't understand Keats. Okay, sure. And so we went back and forth and I explained, you are affecting my opportunities with this C, and I explained and I think I made a chart of the problems. Yes. And so, in the end, what he said was, as a humanitarian effort, I'll offer a C+. And that did end up affecting a lot of my opportunities. And this was after I had been in other classrooms that made me want to just walk out and never return. And I think a lot about some of the stories that my aunties tell me about my great-grandfather on my mother's side. And he did not want us to assimilate. He was very much against his children and grandchildren assimilating, and constantly told us that we are not like them. It's not to say they are not humans, but their system, and I don't know that he was necessarily an English speaker, but in our language, the way it would translate is, you are Anishinaabe first. You are Anishinaabe first, and so your sovereignty comes from Gage Manido, our creator, and nobody can influence that in any way. Your sovereignty is you, right? And so the understanding that we have as peoples all intersecting in this particular time, like in a space of, say, a Cadotte residency, that's what I'm coming with, is my understanding that, like, we are sovereign beings individually, and collectively we come from peoples, like capital P peoples, right? Like, and on the global scale. And not everybody sees it that way. And I was saying earlier, I tend to be kind of naive, like, yeah, like I think we're all on the same page, and then I get hit with a comment like that, you know, or told that, you know, because my mother is from one nation and my father's from another nation, I'm not pure and I have a mixed ancestry, and that must be really difficult and confusing. And that's not anybody's business, and they have no idea the roots of those connections beyond the fact that my parents are married. But, you know, the histories that go into the interrelations within our historic ancestry and our governance models, which are still alive to this day, right? So a person's judgment of that being like having any effect on me other than like dismissal and irritation and frustration is, you know, I mean, that's how I feel. And then at the same time, it's sort of like, I can make a choice there. You know, do I choose to engage that person who is so stuck in their own bigotry and hatred and dismissal that they can't even see that I'm a living, breathing person who's an example of this, of overcoming the stereotype that they espouse? You know, that person doesn't really need to be a part of my full dialogue if they're not able to. What's consistent about my interaction with Cadotte through the years is that I always find that when I'm involved with Cadotte in some way, there's a lot of meaningful interaction, dialogue, work, alchemy that all occur in the space of being either a facilitator or facilitated by some experience or circumstance. And I constantly, everywhere I go in the world, that I identify who I am, I'm given opportunities to talk with people about who I am. And a lot of the times, those people come with a real sense of ignorance and misunderstanding. And being a faculty member now, what I sort of find is that I'm grateful to be in the presence of colleagues who do have an understanding of white supremacy, structural racism, structural oppression, etc., and their own experiences that are very clear to me when they occur. And it's not simply a matter of race. I think it's more broad, and it's about humanity, about being able to see another person's humanity, which is very much a part of how I am always looking to see someone. I'm looking to see what their experience is and to learn from them and to learn if there's commonality and ways that we can help one another and learn from one another in a way that helps us to be joyful and have a positive experience with each other in the time that we have as humans, right? But I think a lot of the times that desire gets disrupted by the structures that characterize our current experience. And I think what I mean by that is that the subtler colonial framework is very alive and pervasive at Cadotte. And this idea of a narrative that doesn't include Indigenous futurity at all. It doesn't include an Indigenous present. It romanticizes an Indigenous past and doesn't see Indigenous people as living, breathing creatures that have a diversity among them. I have had, different colleagues say things to me like, well, if more Indigenous people would care about their heritage like you do, then maybe they wouldn't have so many problems. And that is actually something that has been said to me, right? And that illustrates to me a profound misunderstanding of the diversity that exists within Indigenous people. And I've also had others approach me telling me their stories of their perceived ancestry or connection to Indigenous history. And that's great. I don't want to deny people that. And at the same time, I am a direct result. My whole life is a direct result of histories of removal, genocide, residential schools, assimilation, assault, all of those things are very much a part of my history. I hesitate to say this in an overly critical way, but I would like to say that my truth about Goddard is that, like many other institutions, it aspires to do a lot of great things, and in some ways is highly successful with that. There's a real value, I think, to the low residency model, for sure. And I think it very effectively serves people who don't want to sit in a classroom full time and listen to an old white man and his opinions, right? Or his stories that are, by their very nature, oppressing my history or my experience. And at the same time, there's a really great opportunity right now with education at large to reckon with the history of the colonial past that denies Indigenous futurity in any way. And so looking forward to a future that does include Indigenous people's survival and not their elimination and disappearance is an opportunity that I think more schools can consider. If we address those and we look to the humanity of Indigenous peoples, I think we find that the future can look very different and doesn't have to be chaotic. But it does require that people own their part in that history and consider what it means to be truly inclusive and honest, and to speak from a place of what we would call in Anishinaabe, Debwewin, the truth, the actual truth. And to what extent are we putting our hearts into our work, right? Where is our heart in our work? And I think at Goddard, by and large, I continue to be amazed by students and their work, because you can clearly see their heart is invested in believing in themselves. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And that's why I choose to engage this model as opposed to another one. And that's why I choose to be on this faculty. If there's a way that I can be here for students to help them facilitate that process, and in particular to open the conversation to this idea that an Indigenous woman might actually be somebody that can help them, I feel honored to be able to do that.